after Allahabad High Court judgment, there weren't many books from our side. Now, even if you go now to Google it, archaeology of Ayodhya, the 90% research, 90% results returned are in favor of Marxist historians because they tried to dominate this academia. So they created literature, offline literature. Now they created online literature. So somehow, even people, Hindus who go to Ayodhya for worship, they have still नहीं हुआ होगा, शायद कुछ मिला होगा. First of all, secondly, the Muslims. My book is primarily in the last chapter. I am addressing Muslims. You are the pawns in the larger game of things of Marxist historians. You are the victims. Try to understand their game. They are not with you. They are using you to settle their scores with Hindus.
Goalposts kept changing for the Marxist historians when it comes to Ayodhya. At some point, they were saying that there was no destruction. Then they opposed excavation itself. Then there was some argument about the Buddhist temple. Then, the entire narrative of violence in the name of Ayodhya. The fact is, none of the Karsevak actually attacked any Muslim, touched any other mosque, even in the periphery of Faizabad. Still, and whatever violence happened, especially in Mumbai, that was by the criminal gangs led by the Muslims. And still, the narrative is, Ayodhya violence.
It was the Marxist historians who egged on Babri Masjid Action Committee initially and subsequently Sunni Central Waqf Board to keep changing the goalpost. First, in 1988, they were ready to shift the mosque if provided a proof given to them that there existed a temple. In 1988, there were articles written by Muslims, particularly Sayyid Shahabuddin. He said that if Muslims were given evidence that a temple existed at the site where they disputed...
No, even later Chandrasekhar mediated the negotiations and both the sides agreed to,
And so what happened? Initially they said, show us a proof of a temple. Next year in 1989-90 they said, no, show us a proof of a Ram temple. Then in 1990-91 they started saying, show us a proof of a temple where Ram was born. The Ram Janmabhoomi was a historical fact. There was a temple built in 12th century. It was destroyed. The other side has made so much noise, made so much literature available online. Even in US journals, you will get article on archaeology of Ayodhya, assailing these high court judges, criticizing the ASI methodology.
Namaste and welcome to Organizer YouTube channel. Like every week, today also we have author who is also a researcher, publisher of a seminal book. Ayodhya movement is one movement that shaped the consciousness, the polity and the discourse of post-independent Bharat. Though the issue is settled, still there are some people who want to keep it alive. And there are many historical and legal angles that are still debated, discussed, and create political debates. To understand and explore all these dimensions, Arvind Singh has come up with this voluminous book, India's Rogue Historians. As we know, there were many historians who actually instigated the Muslim side, the Babri Masjid Action Committee, and which actually complicated the matters when it comes to the history writing as well as the legal dimensions of it. So to discuss about the book and to understand the importance of the book once the Ayodhya issue is settled physically, to some extent politically, but still discussed and debated socially and historically. Arvind ji, namaste and welcome to Organizer.
Thank you, sir.
पहले तो इसी से शुरू करते हैं कि अयोध्या is not a new issue.
Right, sir.
There are many books that are written. There are many academic, semi-academic works that are being done. फिर ये ऐसे क्यों लगा कि आपको ये रोग हिस्टोरियंस पर अलग से बुक अभी अयोध्या का सारा इशू सेटल होने के बाद लिखनी चाहिए?
Thank you, Prafulji, for excellent introduction. The idea for writing this book germinated in my mind in right 1995-96. I was doing international politics, MA in international politics, and working part time with Hindu Vivek Kendra. Uh, People in those days knew Hindu Vivek Kendra very well, started by Ashok Chowguleji, and I was working there. And there I got to meet lot of people and read lot of books. And one of the books was Conrad Est, Ayodhya and After.
Mhm.
Since then, I wanted to write something, but I got into journalism 1999, and since then I didn't get enough time to work on this book. The idea revived in 2010 after High Court judgment.
The Allahabad High Court.
Yes, Allahabad High Court judgment. But the judgment was confusing at that time to me in 2010. I couldn't make any head and tails of it.
Mhm.
So, and again, I was very active in journalism. I was in electronic journalism and was at a senior post. So, I didn't get enough time. I gave up in 2018 and then I started working as a writer and editor. After Supreme Court judgment, I decided once again to revive my ambition. And initially, I wanted to do a book around 200 pages summarizing Supreme Court judgment. This judgment runs into 1200 pages. But I thought for the Hindus, it will be, or for common people, it will be difficult to go through the entire judgment. So I decided to summarize it 200 pages. While going through, I realized until unless I go back to the High Court judgment, I won't be able to justice to my book. So when I got 3 volumes, they run around 6,000 words of Allahabad judgment. I decided to go through it. It took me 1.5 years to read the entire High Court judgment. And when I finished it, I thought that now this is a time. And around the time, even in media, social media, people were discussing how the institutions were compromised in favor of Hindus, the court were compromised, ASI was compromised, High Court judges were, Supreme Court judges were compromised. And who are these people making allegations? The same people who were exposed in High Court judgments. So why not? I should call them rogue historians, because rogue here is a dictionary meaning of rogue, badmash, the people who betray the interest of that larger interest of society. So this is how I started writing. It took me 2 years to finish the book. And I would say around 90% of the content of my book research is a primary research. And I tried to contemporize every chapter in my book. When I am writing about archaeological excavation, I'm making it clear what the secular historians, the Marxist historians were writing at the time against judges, against excavation. They didn't want excavation to happen. And when the judgment came in 2010, they were again saying the same thing. They had nothing new to say. What they said in 1989-90, they were saying the same thing again. That means despite the colossal evidence that came to the fore in 2003 excavation, they didn't change their stand. So this is the book, and I think it would be received well, because the people, Marxist historians still, academically I would say, held some sway over our academia.
So, if you, I tried to go through some pages earlier, your primary version also I could flip through. Almost, 150 pages around of notes and references you have given. And you try to give arguments from both the sides that were presented in the court. So, where do you think that these links were missing in earlier works, because the goalposts change over the period of time in the entire Ayodhya discourse. So why did you think that I need to go in depth and go for a 850-page book with so many primary references? What was missing in earlier works that you are trying to bridge now?
Prafulji, after Allahabad High Court judgment, there weren't many books from our side.
Mhm.
Now, even if you go now to Google it, archaeology of Ayodhya, the 90% research, 90% results returned are in favor of Marxist historians because they tried to dominate this academia. So they created literature, offline literature. Now they created online literature. So somehow, even people, Hindus who go to Ayodhya for worship, they have still nahi hua hoga, shayad kuch mila hoga, first of all. Secondly, the Muslims. My book is primarily, in the last chapter, I am addressing Muslims. You are the pawns in the larger game of things of Marxist historians. You are the victims. Try to understand their game. They are not with you. They are using you to settle their scores with Hindus. And as I say, I could get just 2 or 3 books after Meenakshi Jain and then Kunal Kishore, just 2-3 books. But there is not single book after High Court, Supreme Court judgment. And when I finished one chapter of archaeology, I gave it to someone who was involved in the archaeology of Ayodhya. His first reaction after reading the chapter said, क्यों गड़े मुर्दे उखाड़ रहे हैं आप, क्या फायदा मिलने वाला है आपको, आप राम मंदिर चाहते थे मिल गया, आपको कॉन्सेक्रेशन हो गया, अब आप चाहते क्या है. Now, see, this is the psychology of a, and he was not alone. There are a couple of people, even a journalist I met in Delhi and Mumbai, they said, what is the use of doing all these things? We haven't created narrative. We were inside of history. The Ram Janmabhoomi was a historical fact. There was a temple built in 12th century. It was destroyed. The other side has made so much noise, made so much literature available online. Even in US journals, you will get article on archaeology of Ayodhya, assailing these high court judges, criticizing the ASI methodology. So I thought, why not, for once and of all, I'll make it clear. There was some skepticism in my mind, who is going to read 250 pages, but I am writing for the posterity. People will read, I'm sure, if they find interest, they will read it.
As I said, the goalposts kept changing for the Marxist historians when it comes to Ayodhya. At some point, they were saying that there was no destruction. Then they opposed the excavation itself. Then there was some argument about the Buddhist temple. Then the entire narrative of violence in the name of Ayodhya. The fact is, none of the Karsevak actually attacked any Muslim, touched any other mosque, even in the periphery of Faizabad, still. And whatever violence happened, especially in Mumbai, that was by the criminal gangs led by the Muslims.
True.
And still, the narrative is, Ayodhya violence.
It was the Marxist historians who egged on Babri Masjid Action Committee initially and subsequently Sunni Central Waqf Board to keep changing the goalpost. First, in 1988, they were ready to shift the mosque if provided a proof is given to them that there existed a temple. In 1988, there were articles written by Muslims, particularly Sayyid Shahabuddin. He said that if Muslims were given evidence that a temple existed at the site where they disputed.
No, even later Chandrasekhar mediated the negotiations and both the sides agreed to,
And So what happened? Initially they said, show us a proof of a temple. Next year in 1989-90 they said, no, show us a proof of a Ram temple.
Hmm.
Then in 1990-91 they started saying, show us a proof of a temple where Ram was born.
Hmm.
And still there was a chance. What I believe, that our democratic system and the constitution is so resilient that we have been able to successfully resolve some of the gravest challenge to our nationhood.
Hmm.
Tamil secessionism, then insurgency in Northeast, we were able to resolve. Even I felt that this could have been resolved if left between Hindu and Muslims alone. Then there was interestingly, you brought the Chandrasekhar's tenure. Chandrasekhar, according to Advani ji, or even I believe, they made very sincere effort to resolve the dispute. Even at that time, in the third meeting, these historians, the four historians who are part of the panel brought by Babri Masjid Action Committee, they came to the first meeting. They didn't come for the second meeting. And the four historians, along with 39 other historians, 43 historians wrote a letter. That's their favorite way of doing. Wrote a public letter saying, if Babri Masjid Committee, Action Committee is going to yield to Hindu fundamentalism to shift the mosque, we are not with them. So they were, blackmailing.
There was, in fact, a famous statement by Mr. Vishwanath Pratap Singh also, which Arun Shauri reported, and organizer also, we published it in then, when Vishwanath Pratap Singh was Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Where he said, "Arey bhai, masjid hai kaha?" So there was, at the level of consciousness, it was accepted. If the Ram is, worshipped there, it cannot be a mosque.
Yes.
If the temple is lying beneath, there cannot be a mosque. So Babur was a symbol of invasion. Babur was a symbol of aggression, and Baburnama and many other contemporary documents have talked about it. In fact, most of the travelers that time, even later British. But what was the turning point? I feel, and I don't know, means because the legal dimension that you have dealt with started with this 1858 suit in Faizabad court, where Masjid-e-Janam Sthan first time came. So it was definitely not a Janam Sthan of Babur.
Of course, even the contemporary revenue records mentioned is a Masjid Janmasthan, and subsequently when it was brought in 1888 suit, Mahant Ramchandras versus US Secretary of State of India, the judge admitted that it was wrong for Babur to destroy a temple of a Ram who worshipped as a Maryada Purushottam. But since if we allow him to build a temple at Ramchabutra, it will spoil law and order. Mahant Ramchandras, I guess, he went into appeal. The British judge visited the site. He surveyed the entire disputed property, and he came to the same conclusion. We would not allow Hindus to build a temple, but it was wrong to Babur to destroy a temple. Babur, I would say, was never a person like Aurangzeb or a Turkish ruler with India to fundamentalist Muslims in India. It was surprisingly the name Babur's mosque was attached to the disputed property only in 1940. When there was a dispute between Shia and Sunni. In 1940s, the United Province government came with a law, Waqf Act, and that necessitated to determine a particular waqf or the mosque belonging to Shia or Sunni.
Because after 1937 only this problem started.
Yes.
Before that there was a uniform civil code. So because the Sharia law, the waqf idea of waqf everything came only after
Yes,
1937
yes,
elections.
yes,
So all
yes,
the problems started
yes.
because of that.
Yeah, the judge, who gave the judgment in between Shia and Sunni, he said it is a Babar's mosque.
Hmm.
Now, the descendants of Mir Baqi, there was no Mir Baqi. If there was no Mir Baqi, how did there were descendants of how would there descendants of Mir Baqi?
Baqi
We
in the
don't know.
dispute.
Yeah, but they
But they
say
were the party. in
yes,
fact.
but they say he was a Shia.
Hmm.
The person who never existed, he was considered as Shia, and Babar was a Sunni.
Hmm.
So there was a dispute between Shia and Sunni. They wanted to get hold of the property, and thus how became the mosque became Babar's mosque. So it was only 1940 the mosque came to known as a Babar. Before that, the British reports in British revenue records, in land records, the mosque, the place was considered as
Masjid-e-Janam.
Masjid-e-Janamsthan.
Now, the name Babar was attached. By 49, like we reclaim many places,
Hmm.
even from the British rule. Uh, uh, and we were proud to do that. We considered as independence, outcome of a freedom struggle.
True.
We changed the names of the, like Viceroy House was changed. Even in the parliament, we introduced, the citations and the shlokas from Vedas and Upanishads. So we considered that as a, symbol of freedom. The same thing happened actually with the Ram Mandir also.
Hmm.
But still there was a very, and there were people, whether K.K. Nair or what happened during that period, that till 1980s nobody bothered about Ram Janmabhoomi much. Besides, people like the Ramanandi movement and Paramahansa Das, they were the sole battle. It was very localized kind of battle.
Yes.
Till 1980s we don't see much of a buzz around what Nehruvian secularism and the historians did in this period, 40s, late 40s, 49 onwards.
The movement around after 1949, when the Hindus entered under the central dome and installed idols of Ram and Sita, the other side, the Muslims went into the court, and court claimed a status quo, but asked Hindus, since it was a Vaishnava tradition, the idol needs to be taken care of. So the court allowed 2-3 months to do puja and naivedya and everything, but somehow it never caught the consciousness of Hindus. There was an incident in 1977 when Morarji Desai became Prime Minister. Some Muslims went to him to make some complaints, and Morarji Desai said that why don't you return 3 sacred places, including Ayodhya, to Hindus, and then we will move from here. They didn't come back to Morarji Desai. The turning point was Meenakshipuram conversion, 1981 February. The entire village got converted to Islam, and the very first thing or the step they took was to change the name of the village to Rahimat Nagar. It was a shock. It was a awakening for the entire Hindu society. Moropant Pingle, whom we consider the architect of Hindu resurgence, he went to Meenakshipuram, talked to people, and then he came back. He came back to Nagpur, and Sarsang Chalak Balasaheb Devras, he met, and they discussed, and Moropant Pingle conveyed that we have to raise a movement to make Hindus aware of the existential challenge they are facing. The 30-40 years of history teaching has put Hindus into an inertia. They need to jolted out of it. Moropant Pingle went around country for a year galvanizing Hindus, and surprisingly the very first meeting that decided to relaunch the movement initiated by Sangh people and with able cooperation from Congress at that time.
Dr. Karan Singh,
Daud Dayal Khanna, Guzarilal Nandawar people, yes.
These were the people
Yes.
who first time, I
Yes.
think if I'm not wrong, at Muradabad,
Murada, yes, Muradabad.
Ramnavami Utsav was there,
Yes.
and there first time they spoke about that Ramlala is in jail.
Ramlala is in jail.
That was the starting triggering point,
Yes.
so to say.
Yes.
And then Dharma Sansad and Hindu
Dharma Sansad
Utsava.
took place. Bala Sahib Devras called the 1980s a decade of wounded Hindu psyche.
Mhm.
Because Hindus were battered and butchered everywhere.
Mhm.
In Punjab, in Kashmir, in Northeast, and even where they felt they were safe, in South, the petrodollar were pumped in to get entire village converted to Islam.
Mhm.
And there was these subterranean movement going across the country to target Hindus.
But post-partition, I don't understand what Marxist historians did, because post-partition there was a guilt consciousness even in the Muslim community that somewhere the Muslims are responsible, and we kept talking about the social justice movement, the caste-based discrimination and atrocities, but somehow we are reluctant to speak about the religious atrocities that took place in India, because most of the Muslims in India are actually the victims of those atrocities.
Yes.
Their ancestors were forcefully converted. Therefore, they were brutally either murdered or
Forced to
forcefully
convert,
converted. The mothers and sisters were brutally tortured, raped, and that's how But somehow we are not ready, and all these things are documented by the invaders themselves or their accompagnants. But we are not. What was the reason behind this Marxist historiography? That somehow they don't want to talk about civilizational justice, but they want to keep harping about the social justice.
There are a couple of articles by Romila Thapar.
Mhm.
There was one seminar that took place around 1962-63, and that entire papers were brought in a book. It's called Problems of History Writing in India, edited by S. Gopal and Romila Thapar.
Okay.
And then there was a seminar organized by All India Radio in 1968. Again, there were three major papers: Harbans Mukhia, Romila Thapar, and Bipin Chandra. They provided covering fire to Muslims. Anything to do with Muslims, because Muslims were minority at the time, they felt that they required some extra protection. And if India would need to avoid another partition, the country required to organize on the basis of class. So talking about caste and religion was anathema to them. So they started writing about how Hindus and Muslims, the poor Hindu and poor Muslim, have things in common than a rich elite Hindus. They tried to bring them together. This is their one approach. The second approach
That was
was
also starting point of JNU school.
JNU came in 1970,
69, 70.
So it came into 72, and Nurul Hasan was education minister. He was a confirmed Marxist historian. And when he joined Congress party after he retired from Aligarh Muslim University. He joined Rajya Sabha, then he became minister. And when Indira Gandhi conceived a university after name of her father, it was incumbent upon Nurul Hasan to bring people from all over country to JNU. So R.S. Sharma was at Patna University. He was brought to Delhi University. He was at Delhi University. S. Gopal was with Oxford. Then he was with External Affairs Ministry. Then he was brought to head the department. Bipin Chandra from he was in Delhi University. He was brought. Satish Chandra, he was at Rajasthan University. He was brought. Romila Thapar, Delhi University. Harbans Mukhia, he was Delhi University. He was brought to this. So the Center of
And
Historical
many
Studies.
of their backgrounds, the academic background is also fishy. Some of them are just BA or coming from some chemistry
Yes,
background
yes.
or science
Yes, yes.
background, but they are eminent historians.
Yes, eminent historians. Even I was it was appalled to find that one of the eminent archaeologists, Dhaneshwar Mandal, who goes by the name of D. Mandal, he was never a PhD in archaeology, had never conducted any field archaeology. But they called him Dr. Mandal or Professor Mandal. He got an MA in archaeology from Allahabad University, but somehow he rose to become a professor. And there are quite a few number of people who are just because they move around in incestuous circle of eminent historians, they associated glory with their professors or the guide who helped them in finishing their PhDs.
So, again, encounters and their roles that you talked about, how did they make an intervention? Because 1980s was a very interesting point. As I said, earlier period, barring few fundamentalist Muslims, by and large, Muslim community had some kind of guilt consciousness about the partition.
True.
Meenakshipuram was one point, Shahabano was another point. First time again the pan-Islamism and the Sharia and the Islamic identity started gripping. How far these rogue historians played a role in that process?
They were spokesperson of these fundamentalist Muslims. If you read English newspaper around the time of Shahabanu or subsequently the banning of satanic verses, there were a couple of Muslims like Sayyid Shahabuddin, very vocal people in English media. But you will be surprising to find these is liberal historians. In these liberal intellectuals, the member of civil society, they would go around talking or preventing any reform in Muslim society. Even though people who talked about reforms in Muslim society were treated as pariah. Now, forget about 80s what happened. Just see about what happened around Triple Talaq. Who are these people? These historians, intellectuals, liberal thinkers who are defending Muslims. And they don't want any reform happening in Muslim society. So they want Muslim to remain backward so they could be used. Their social economic conditions could be used
for class struggle.
For class and then confront and then keep confronting Hindus. The problem with some of the Muslim fundamentalists is that they always talk in absolutes, extremes. ये नहीं होता, हमारे इस्लाम में ये नहीं मंजूर है, हमारे यहाँ पर अल्लाह को यही कबूल है. There is no point of reconciliation.
There is no possibility of dialogue even.
There is no possibility of dialogue. True. And as I again say, these historians, the liberal, these intellectuals always work as a spokespersons. Arun Shourie called them thekedars of secularism.
So then came the actual movement and the the demolition of the disputed structure. And after that, suddenly, the trajectory changed. In a way, movement, a phase of movement got over, but the legal battle continued. And then came this 2002-3, the crucial period where Archaeological Survey of India and the B.B. Lal and K.K. Mohammed and all these people, they played a crucial role in this process. So what happened in this 99 to 2002 phase that finally, the things started coming out in physical terms, but still intellectually they were not acceptable?
The turning point was Dr. Ismail M. Faruqi versus Union of India judgment.
Mhm.
It was 3-2 judgment,
Mhm.
and half a dozen Muslims have challenged the Ayodhya Certain Area Acquisition Act
Hmm.
after the demolition.
Demolition.
19 the act
Which was actually initially I think uh, order presidential order brought by the
Yes,
Narsiyar Rao government.
it was a presidential reference. Along with this act was heard by the five bench, and the majority judgment held that the mosque is not essential to the practice of the religion of Islam. Muslims can offer namaz anywhere. First. Secondly, this particular mosque is not essential to the practice of religion of Islam. This particular mosque, the Babri Mosque. Third, it is a sovereign power of state to acquire any property, including the religious places of minority communities, for the public purpose. So that was, I would call that, in my view, that is the first stepping stone towards Ram Temple. At that time, the Hindu opinion was not in favor of. They thought that since they had evidence all along, the Supreme Court, why didn't they pronounce a judgment once and for all? But it didn't happen. People were very upset at that time. In my opinion, that was the first stepping stone towards Ram Temple. And interestingly, the Supreme Court asked Narasimha Rao government to return superfluous and surplus property that government has acquired to their rightful owners. So government has acquired odd 67 acres land, and bearing 0.3, which disputed property occupied, returned every land to their rightful owner. But the Rao government was on back foot. Demolition ho gaya tha. Now they don't want to return the land which belonged to Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Nirmohi, all these people. So if Narasimha Rao would have given back the land, the mosque was virtually impossible even after any court judgment. But Narasimha Rao didn't return it. But I found that at that time, even if the Vice Council prevailed in Muslim, they would have not objected, or they were given up their fight. But once again, now in my book, every time when there is a attempt at compromise, I go back to the contemporary news reports, particularly Hindu and Frontline, to see what they were saying, how they were objecting to each and every move at reconciliation. So there was an attempt to reconcile in 1990 by Chandrasekhar. They scuttled it. There was an attempt by VP Singh to bring an ordinance. They scuttled it. Then again 1992, there was a negotiations when Rao mediated in October 1992. They scuttled it. Again, after M. Ismail Faruqi versus Union of India, there was then when Supreme Court virtually said ki mosque is not essential to the practice of Islam, and even this Babri mosque, the disputed structure, was not essential to the practice of Islam. That was very crucial point. They would have said, they were given up arms. Hinduo, aapki jagah le lo, humko koi dusri jagah de do. But they didn't do it. Again, there was very interesting story. There was a letter written by Ashok Singhal ji to Prime Minister Vajpayee in 2000. Very acidic letter. One has to read it to believe it. Where Singhal ji said, you have betrayed Ram. राम रथ पर सवार होकर आप सत्ता में आए हो, अब राम को आपने धोखा दे रहे हो. So why don't you take the opportunity? Now you are in government, you are a prime minister. Why don't you take some concrete step towards realization of Ram Temple? So the government started exploring the possibilities, and one of the possibilities was to go back to 1994 judgment where Supreme Court asked government to return the land. So they started process to return the land. Then again Muslim, there was a judgment of Muhammad Aslam versus Bure Union of India, where the Supreme Court prevented central government from returning the land.
Oh.
Don't return the land, because the what they call appurtenances of the civil suit, because not the disputed property, the adjoining property is also associated with the resolution of the dispute. So don't return it. Then again, in when this fizzled out, Advani ji went to Sringeri, requested Jayendra Saraswati ji to come and mediate between Hindu and Muslims. Jayendra Saraswati ji came, he had a talk with Sunni Central Work Board, BMSC, then he went to Lucknow. I have quoted Shia leader Kalbe Sadiq. He said, "This Sunni नहीं चाहते इसका हल हो, इसलिए मैं इस्तीफा दे रहा हूँ यहाँ से." The Muslim personal law boards had set up a committee to negotiate on behalf of Muslims with Jayendra Saraswati ji. And Kalbe Sadiq resigned from that committee saying that Sunni नहीं चाहते इसका कोई हल निकले. And he resigned from that committee. So again, and importantly at that time, Hindustan Times carried an article by Irfan Habib. Irfan Habib said excavation had going on in Ayodhya, and there is nothing had come substantially in the hands of Vishwa Hindu Parishad. So which is why they brought a Shankaracharya from south to Delhi to negotiate. And if Muslims, or if any mediation with representative appointed by government is going to happen, it will be in violation of the secular principle of constitution. Think of it. A mediation between Hindu Muslims, and I have quoted the entire passage from Irfan Habib's Hindustan Times article. Again, so any attempt, they stalled it, they prevented it, they saw that nothing would move, and anything that would help Hindus, they are tooth and nail against it.
And still in 2002-3 excavation came out. Most of the evidences clearly show, in fact, there was a description of the length and breadth of the temple that was lying beneath the disputed structure. And there the real battle started in Allahabad High Court. It was a very, very tedious task, whether getting those documents, translations, interpretation. But surprisingly, none of these historians actually helped in that process. They stayed away from the actual legal battle. They completely got exposed in the Allahabad High Court, and Allahabad High Court actually mentions about this.
Yes, good that you brought the archaeology point of view. My book consists 60% of archaeology report. The court says, the bench, Allahabad High Court bench says that so far nothing in 2002, the court says so far has nothing come to us to decide this civil suit. Evidence A goes in favor of Muslims, evidence B goes in favor of Hindus, and there is nothing for us to decide. Interestingly, people must know that from 1996, when the hearing started in Allahabad High Court to 2006, the bench were changed 10 times. The judges were transferred or elevated, or they retired. Simply, the bench. So I had a good talk with Justice Sudhir Agarwal. He said that there was some force behind this thing, that they didn't want it to happen. But interestingly, the judges of the bench, 3 judges of the bench, when they said there's nothing on record to evidence to show that this place belonged to Hindus or Muslims, in August 2002, they decided to go to Ayodhya. And that was a turning point, the entire movement. Because after surveying, they went to Ram Katha Park, where Tulsi Bhavan, where all motifs so far discovered after demolition and before, they were kept. and the entire ground floor were stuffed with these people, and the judges were startled. If the normal scraping and demolition could brought this much motive, this comprehensive motives before public, what would happen if we decide to go under the ground excavation? So when they return to Lucknow, they go for excavation. So in August 20, I think in third week of August, they
This was in 2002.
2002. In third week, in I think in 20th on 20th August, they issue a notice to parties asking for their views. What if we go for excavation? Then they could go for a GPR survey. And when court decided to go to the excavation, there was a hullabaloo from these historians. One of them said, and you have to believe it, you have to read it to believe it. One of them said that it will be a recipe of civil war. If court goes for excavation, it will be a recipe for civil war. And when they opposed GPR survey, then the excavation started in March 2003, and within a 2 weeks of the excavation started, a massive structure was lurking behind this. This disputed structure was around 26 meter in length. The underground was around 60 meter in length. Think of it. 60 meter in length. And then they changed their tune. And then you would not believe that first they said there was no structure. Sunni Central Board's central plea was the mosque was built on a virgin piece of land. There's no structure. Then when the structure came out, they said it was a mosque. It was a Sultanate mosque. Now ask them who built the Sultanate mosque. They don't know. If it was a Sultanate mosque, how come the mosque got the name of Babar? Because against Sharia. Sharia says that who builds the mosque would give his name. So how come Babar got his name? Okay. With Sultanate mosque में जब बना तो फिर मीर बाकी कहाँ से आ गया?
और फिर उसमें गोपद्म और कमल कहाँ से आ गया?
The Hindu motives. And interestingly, they said the Hindu motives. The other day I was presented this book to Dr. B.R. Mani, and he had a good laugh, and I mentioned that though debris, the Hindu motives, they said they came from debris. When the mosque was built, the builders or the laborers brought debris to level the site. So the Hindu motives came for debris, but the Islamic motives were associated with the structure. अगर डेब्रिज बाहर से आ रही है तो हिंदू भी आएगा, मुसलमान मोटिव्स भी आएंगे ना. वो कह रहे नहीं, सिर्फ हिंदू जो बाहर से आया, मुसलमान तो स्ट्रक्चर में ही पाए गए हैं.
But there was one interesting thing when this 2010 judgment was coming up. The so-called historians report. The impartial historians.
That was in 1991. And there is because the 4 historians were invited by Babri Masjid Action Committee to come to a talk, to come to negotiation table with Hindu counterparts. The first meeting they came, and the second meeting they didn't come.
No, but that report was still referred in until 2010 judgment.
Yes. And then the report came in May 1991 after Chandrasekhar government collapsed, and the Supreme, they again tried to rake up. Dr. Rajiv Dhawan tried to rake up historians' report in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said it's a mere opinion devoid of facts. These are the very words of Supreme Court.
I think Professor Suraj Bhan.
The archaeology part was written by Suraj Bhan. The historical part was written by R.S. Sharma. And then D.N. Jha and Muhammad M. Attar Ali. Muhammad Attar Ali, he died before. He died, yes, around 2008, 2009 something.
So, where they are openly accepting that they don't know Sanskrit.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know any of the scriptural texts from Vedas to Puranas, and still they are arguing that there is no evidence of Sri Ram being born in Ayodhya.
Hmm.
And still we consider them eminent historians.
Uh, 6 historians were impaneled from Sunni Central Waqf Board as expert witness in history,
Hmm.
and 8 expert witnesses impaneled as archaeologists. 8 and 6 historians. You have to read them and then you will have a good laugh. The first one, who as a historian, was Suresh Chandra Mishra from Satyavati College, Delhi.
Hmm.
He knew nothing.
Hmm.
He couldn't even comprehend a simple English. He appeared as an expert in epigraphy.
Hmm.
When you are expert in epigraphy, you are an archaeologist. You have some understanding of anthropology. You have some understanding of history, medieval history. You must know Pali, Prakrit, Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian. This person says, I went into the mosque and there was a Persian inscription.
Hmm.
Then he changes. In second time he says, no, they were in Arabic.
Hmm.
Then court says, no, they were in Persian. He says, no, they were in Arabic. Then the court asks, are you an expert in Persian? When he says, no, I don't even understand Persian, I don't even understand Arabic. And he has some smattering of Sanskrit.
Hmm.
Then you have Professor Sushil Srivastav.
Hmm.
Now this person left his wife, converted to Islam, and his father-in-law and wife egged him on to write a book called Disputed Mosque, and that was presented in evidence.
Hmm.
This person again, he knew nothing of Arabic and Persian
Hmm.
or even Sanskrit.
Hmm.
Surprisingly, these were ventriloquists. बोलने वाले गुड्डे होते हैं ना, वो सारे लोग थे.
Hmm.
The people behind those who controlled their threats,
Hmm.
Romila Thapar, Arya Sharma, Irfan Habib,
Hmm.
K.M. Srimali,
Hmm.
Amiya Kumar Bagchi,
Hmm.
Savyasachi Bhattacharya,
Hmm.
Niladri Bhattacharya. Why didn't they come?
Hmm.
If they were so sure of their historicity and historiography and their history and fact and scientific temperament, why didn't they come before the court? They didn't come. And they sent the foot soldiers to be martyred.
Hmm.
And they were martyred. Every one of them martyred.
Court openly says. talks
Court,
about it.
court, even Justice Sudhir Agarwal was so, I would say, very frankly, but very frustratingly, he observes that responsibility of historians, archaeologists is to state history so that they should not, or no one try to spoil the communal atmosphere. They have to state
Facts.
true history and facts. But these historians came before the court.
Opinionated and ideologically
Yes.
motivated.
Every one of them.
Then came the 2010 famous judgment, one third, and one good part was, Ramlala was recognized as a party and the owner of the central dome. So that was, but still it didn't settle the issue. They still started talking about the intervention. They didn't consider it, the Marxist historian, the rogues, didn't accept the defeat. In fact, now they changed the goalpost and they said, no, the main issue is the demolition. Not demolition by Babar, but Hindus coming together and reclaiming Rama Janmabhoomi was the main issue. So that needs to be addressed, and that's how this entire case, because that time UPA government was there and then Liberan Commission report was there. So this should be, what we see after 2010. How did the things come back to the evidence, and what happened After 2015-16 is again miraculous, because the number of pages that were translated in Faizabad, the way Yogi government supported this entire process, the way the experts were pulled in who were not eminent per se, but they contributed their time and energy in going to the original documents, translating it and submitting it to the court through for the day-to-day hearing. So how did it change after?
See, no one was happy with September 2010 Allahabad High Court judgment. Even Hindus were not happy. If Hindus would have accepted, the situation would not have been different than what we get it now, Mathura. So Chikbai Jol temple and mosque was not possible. Even Hindus were not happy. But there were two things that a court accepted, that Ram Lalla is a juridical entity,
Juridical.
and his place of birth is supremely personified by his presence. So the place in itself is a juridical personality, deity as well as his birthplace. They were very, historians, Asghar Ali Engineer called it a Panchayat Faisla. And again, Bromila Thapar wrote a lengthy article in Hindu and prodding Muslim not to accept and challenge it. And I have given names and all these things. Even Supreme Court didn't want to get into it. Supreme Court wanted to wash its hands and to get into it. There are 12 appeals filed, and for 7 years Supreme Court did nothing. In 2016-17, Subramaniam Swamy filed a PIL. Justice Kehar, Chief Justice of India, Justice Kehar, rejected it, saying, "What is your locus standi?" Then again, there was a very smart move by Narendra Modi government, which I have tried to put light on it. They've filed a writ petition in Supreme Court saying in 1994, Dr. Ismail M. Farooqi versus Union of India, you said that return the surplus land, and you stopped it again in 2003. Now it is 2017. Why don't you return the land to their rightful owners? So it was a catch-22 position for Supreme Court. At one hand, they didn't want to hear the case, hear the appeal, and the other hand, they didn't want to return the land. So the Modi government nudged the Supreme Court to do something. एक तो वो अपील की सुनवाई कर लीजिए या फिर जमीन लौटा दीजिए. ठीक है, यू कांट हैव चित भी मेरी पट भी मेरा वाला खेल नहीं चल सकता है. एंड देन at that time, the Chief Justice was Deepak Mishra. Deepak Mishra formed a 3-member bench, and Kapil Sibal tried to impeach him. That way everyone knows. And so when he retired, Justice Gogoi formed a 5-member bench, and they sat for 41 marathon hearing from August to August to November. But I would say that the writ petition filed by Narendra Modi government was a turning point. Otherwise, the Supreme Court would not have heard the case. And even in Supreme Court, the Supreme Court accepted the Ram as a juridical personality, but it refused to accept his Janmasthan as juridical personality because it would have a long-term consequences. If Supreme Court had accepted it, then the Places of Worship Act would have become little weaker because Hindus claim over Krishna Janmasthan
would have automatically
would have got it stronger. So, but Supreme Court says there is no preponderance of probabilities. If the evidence from Muslim side and evidence from Hindu side are weighed, the evidence from Hindu sides are much heavier, and it is very excellent judgment. Supreme Court judgment, very excellent judgment. At least last 300 pages, I think every Indian should read it, where the judges brought out the relentless struggle of Hindus right from its demolition. When demolition happened 1528 at the time of Babur or at the time of Aurangzeb, we don't know. But relentless struggle of Hindus to reclaim the site. And interestingly, even High Court and the Supreme Court, they didn't find any evidence of namaz being offered up to 1858.
There is a consistent ownership that
Yes.
Hindus have, that was proved in the court of law,
Yes,
and that became the primary ground.
yes.
But you again, end your book with bringing in Romila Thapar. Now the judgment is over. The Ramlala Virajman has reclaimed the
His place.
Janmasthan. स्थापना भी हो गई, हिंदुओं ने वहां पे जाना भी शुरू किया. Why do you think that this last chapter of yours, where you are again bringing in Romila Thapar, and how do you think that this book of yours is going to shape the future debate on history writing and historiography from a bringing in legal perspective, because you have actually combined the history, the legal battle, and more importantly the media coverage of it,
In
archaeology. So why do you think that this particular book is going to
I would start from the last chapter. The last chapter was not initially I thought of. When I finished first draft around early months of 2024, I went through it and then I realized there was something missing. There was a need of a chapter where I should discuss the Marxist historiography, what are the foundational aspects of Marxist historiography, and what is the purpose of Marxist historiography. They have used historiography as a tool to advance their political agenda. And the political agenda is clearly Nehruvian secularism. All their writings, all their
secularism and Marxist socialism.
Marxist socialism. Yes. And all their writings, they have attempted to cover over the Muslim atrocities and highlight the caste atrocities over lower caste. That was true. Hindus have accepted it. They have moved on from it. But they never allowed Muslims to own what their ancestors did once. At least there is no faithful admission from these historians. Leave aside the Muslims. How would I say that Muslims of today are responsible what Bakhtiyar Khilji did or Aurangzeb did? They are not responsible. In the same way, Hindus of today are not responsible what their
in fact,
ancestors
as I say,
did.
most of the Muslims are actually victims of those aggressions.
Yes, I come to this point, and then Marxist historiography. Then how it started, the genesis of Marxist historiography. Who were the people? What were those books where they were written and the withdrawal inspirations? I have discussed everything. They are still not ready to believe that they have lost the battle. They are still angsty-ridden people going after writers to whom they didn't agree and calling them various names and taking a
they are the ones who started cancel culture in academia.
Yes, cancel culture. Now वो कह रहे हैं कि पहले we want to discuss with you, but show your paper that you got. These people said हम पेपर नहीं दिखाएंगे. 4 साल पहले हम पेपर नहीं दिखाएंगे. अब कह रहे नहीं पहले डिग्री का पेपर दिखाइए तो हम आपसे बात करेंगे. These are the same people. डिग्री का पेपर दिखाइए फिर आपसे बात करेंगे. See, so interestingly, even Romila Thapar came out with a book. It was an interview, and she was interviewed, And I was smiling when I read that she said she's not a Marxist historian, but she uses Marxist historiographical tool to analyze history. तो ये तो कहना हो गया कि मैं तो चोर नहीं हूँ लेकिन रखा था सामान मैं लेके चल दिया.
So this is a a good lighter way to end this conversation कि भारत के ज्ञान का बहुत सारा हिस्सा जो है वो चुरा कर कहीं पे छुपा दिया और जो भारत का इतिहास था ही नहीं उसको हिस्ट्री के रूप में प्रेजेंट कर दिया. बट अरविंद जी, हार्टी कॉन्ग्रेचुलेशंस. This is a very thought provoking book, whatever I could read, and great names have already endorsed it, and the kind of referencing that you have done, I think future researchers will definitely get some inspiration from this. So thank you very much for coming up with this book, and thank you for sparing time and talking to our.
Thank you, Praful ji, for having me here. I'm thankful to organizer for giving me opportunity to speak about the book, and you have been a great deal of help. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, friends, if you want to read the history of Ayodhya movement, the reclamation of Ayodhya Rama Janmabhoomi Sthan, and the role that the legal practitioners, the historians, the archaeologists, and the media played in this entire game of keeping this battle alive and keeping Hindus and Muslims at loggerheads without accepting the history. A must-read book by Mr. Arvind Singh, India's Rogue Historians, with a subtitle, How They Fought Against Hindus and Lost. So, they losing this battle legally, intellectually, is a process. That process is not just about history or polity. This is the intellectual battle of India, intellectual battle of ancient Bharat to reclaim its itihasa. So, to get more references about Bharat's itihasa in the contemporary context, go through Arvindji's book, India's Rogue Historians. Thank you very much for watching Organizer YouTube channel. Keep supporting us, be voice of the nation, share this link with your friends, family members, and support Organizer Weekly. Thank you very much. Namaste.